Hello everybody and welcome to another episode of Flying with Overkill in DCS World, and today we're going to be starting the AV-8B Night Attack Harrier. The F-16 is not done, but we're sort of running low on features, so I'm sort of waiting for further development where we can continue on with the aircraft, and I'm sure a bunch of things are going to be changing. So in the meanwhile, I put out a vote last week to see which aircraft you guys prefer the most, and the Harrier won it by quite a bit. So we're going to go ahead and get started with her today. First thing we're going to do is, as always, we'll take a quick spin around the cockpit. I won't go over every single little thing. We won't talk about warning lights and things like that today. We'll talk about them in the startup process when we do our lights test. Today we're just going to sort of try to get familiar with where some things are and then move around the cockpit as necessary. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to be locking the camera here off and on. There we go. Oh, give me a second. I know why that happened. Just controls. Got F9 and clear that guy. Alright, so let's go ahead and get started. Here we have the DECS, or Digital Engine Control Switch. We have our fuel shutoff lever. Coming down to the bottom here, we have our engine RPM selector switch, followed by the engine fuel control switch. The engine fuel control has a primary and standby redundant systems. This would only be necessary in the event of a system failure, so we're not going to worry about it too much. We have the lid switch, or lift improvement device system. And then we have our oxygen switch. We're going to want that, obviously. And then our water or HTO dump switch. The AV-8B Harrier carries 500 pounds of water in the event of using vertical takeoff or landing. As there isn't much wind passing through the intakes, it has a real hard time cooling itself, so it needs that water on board to do so. And then obviously here we have our oxygen hose for the flight mask. Over here we have our formation light switch, or lights rotary with a brightness adjustment, our position lights, anti-collision lights, and auxiliary lights, the external lights master switch, rear for off, forward for night vision mode, and or center for night vision mode, forward for normal, and then our seat adjustment knob. Coming down here we have our aerial refueling probe control switch, center for out, forward for pressurized. What this will do is leave the fuel probe extended and then use the air coming to the tank to pressurize the system. It's not actually used for refueling. Okay, so when you're doing AAR, you'll just want the out position. Left and right wing fuel dump switches, our fuel boost pump switches. Okay, we would also want the forward position for normal operation. And our fuel proportioning switch, which we'd also want to make sure is on before startup. Alright, let's go ahead and unpause here a second. And try to come around. Alright, so working our way backwards, here we have the exhaust nozzle control lever. This actually rotates the exhaust nozzle on the back up and down as we desire. You have your exhaust nozzle stop lever. You can set this to a desired position, then the exhaust nozzle lever can no longer go any further than that. Our rudder trim switch, our throttle tensioner knob, and then we have our why am I not thinking? Manual fuel switch. Just to the well, let's talk about the throttle real quick. Here we have our throttle target designator control knob, our countermeasure switch, our cage uncage button, our air programming switch, the COM1 and COM2 mic switches, as well as the flap switch. And then on the forward end of the throttle, we have our antenna elevation switch. So this is going to be how we control the radar elevation. Then moving forward in the cockpit, give me a second here. We're going to want to come forward a bit. And turn. Maybe it's still not enough, huh? Trying to get a good angle on it, guys, but it's a little hard to catch him. So I'll try to find a better spot here in the future, but in the interest of continuing, right here is the parking brake lever, which also works as a throttle stop gate. You have to actually click on it. It's a little more difficult in track IR than in VR. Okay, no, that's a throttle release. There it is. Okay, so when you click on that, okay, it releases the throttle from the stop position and allows you to rotate it back. So to lock the throttle, you got to find your mouse when you're in track IR. Sort of click right there. That moves a little lever on the side of it, puts it into cutoff, and then you can put your parking brake back on. Okay? You'll be surprised how often you guys are going to forget that if it's your first time flying it. All right, here we have our engine management system annunciator record switch. We have the JPTL, which is, I always forget what it exactly means, so give me a second so I can find that. So I don't sound like a dork, if I don't already. Hang on. I know I have it here somewhere. Give me a second. Give me a second. Be patient. JPTL is Jet Pipe Temperature Limiter. And then we have the EMS engine monitoring system, or the pilot record button. Okay. Coming up here, we have your SAS switches, so your stability control switches, Q field, which adds force feedback to the stick using hydraulic pressure, your automatic flight control switch, and your altitude hold for the autopilot. Up here, we have our rudder pedal shaker switch. Here we have the landing light switches, so center is hover, full forward is approach, our emergency jettison button, our anti-skid switch, flaps bit test, down lock override for the gear handle, or for the gear switch when the gear is down, emergency gear rotation, landing gear emergency battery in case main power has failed, obviously the landing gear handle, flaps power switch, and flaps setting switch. Coming up top, we have our combat water ejection switch, and then we have the H2O switch for takeoff, and down for landing, center for off. Simple stopwatch. Give it a click once to start it, click again to stop it, right click on that guy to, or give the right button a click to reset it. Master arm switch, flare salvo switch, aircraft master mode switch, air to ground navigation VSTOL. Our two MPCDs, obviously, multi-purpose color displays. Our UFC option switches, okay. For example, if we were to come and, oh, we might be out of power. I've been running this for a little bit. We're probably out of power. I think I killed the battery. Anyway, much like you would... So, for example, if we were to press TACAN here, all the TACAN information would come up over here, whether you want to be in transmit, receive, X-ray or Yankee modes, etc. Okay, coming up to the UFC, you have your two master caution lights, your UFC display panel. The TMR light, I always forget that one. Give me a second. I had that one written down. I always forget what it means. Like, every time forget what it means. Like, don't think I've gotten it right once, kind of forget what it means. Oh, gosh. You want to know how dumb that is? It means timer. Anyway, timer mode switch, and then you have your target of opportunity. Obviously, the keypad mode for, or the keypad for the UFC. Here you have your enter button, on-off button for the different power systems. Your IFF, your TACAN, your... all-weather landing system, your weapon configuration, your waypoint overfly, this is for the INS, and then your beacon, and your altitude setting for the aircraft, and the emissions control system. Okay, we'll go over those as time moves on. Left and volume knobs for COM 1, COM 2, COM channel displays, and COM selectors and rotaries. Brightness knob up for the HUD. Or for the UFC, excuse me. Down here we have our HUD Control Panel. Normal operation, Reject 1 and Reject 2 will remove most of the symbology that's on the HUD, clearing out the display, making it easier to focus on your primary displays. Brightness knob for the hub as well as power control, obviously going all the way down to off, shuts the HUD off. And then your master mode switches, or switch for the HUD. You have your day, night, and auto. Video control, I don't even think it's used. And then your altimeter switch for barometric, switching between barometric and radar altimeter. Alright, and then I'm going to get the stick out of the way for a minute. Oh, maybe not. Are you really bouncing back? You are bouncing back. That sucks. Alright, so I'm going to hold you for a second, I guess. I'm going to lock the camera here for a minute. All right, cool. It was like breaking my neck trying to do that. Let's go ahead and move on down a bit. I'm going to do that 219 times. Here you have your course selector knob for the HSI for the course selector bug. You have your standby airspeed indicator indicating speed in hundreds of knots per hour. Standby ADI attitude director indicator, AOA indicator, vertical velocity indicator indicating climb or descent rate in thousands of feet per minute. Our standby altimeter, our slip indicator. Coming down to the plethora of switches down here on the bottom, we have our FLIR power switch, video recorder switch, video recorder display selector. Stepping down a knot here, we have our dual processor mode selector switch, DMT, this we will be using, dual mode tracker toggle switch, our INS rotary. Down here at the far bottom, we have our probe heat switch and our mission computer switch, and these aren't used at all or modeled for us, so we're not going to worry about them today. All right. Coming up to the flight stick, we have our sensor select switch, our waypoint step button, our countermeasure switch. Actually, that can be right. Sorry, air-to-air weapon selector switch. That took me a second. I had to think about it. Weapons release, so your pickle button. The trigger up front will shoot the sidewinder, the sidearm, and the guns. Obviously, this is your trim hat. The pinky switch way down here on the bottom is your air-to-ground target undesignate button or nose wheel steering button. And the paddle switch in front would be your SAS switch, emergency disconnect switch. So basically, disconnects is the autopilot, is what it does. And then, coming over to the next segment here. Let me unpause my camera. Coming on top, we have our engine readout. Here we have the bit test for the engine display. Coming to the duct here, this is our engine reaction control duct system pressure in PSI, your fuel flow indicator in pounds per minute, your stabilator position, so your trim indication for the vertical trim setting, engine RPM, JPT temperature in degrees in Celsius, how many pounds of water you have on board, and the exhaust nozzle position indicators. Okay. Down the side, we have our radar warning receiver control knob. You have your expendable dispenser countermeasures control knob. So auto dispenses the selected countermeasure automatically. Up dispensers the top half of the fuselage dispensers first, and then down the bottom half of the fuselage dispensers first, and then RWR, if functioning, would use the RWR to automatically dispense whatever countermeasures are necessary based on the threat. I'm not sure if that's functional on this aircraft or not. And then finally, we have our electronic countermeasures, which obviously off for off, standby for standby, bit for bit test. Receive smart standby pods emits based on signals received. So based on the threat by the RWR, it determines whether or not it should trigger the jammer. And then repeat is continuing as jamming. And then over here, we have another clock. And then here is the brightness knob also for the engine display. All right, moving down. Coming down here, we have our brake pressure and hydraulic pressure on both 1 and 2. We have our brake accumulator pressure, our bit panel. Okay, we're not going to go over each one of these because that's just, there's a lot. Cabin altimeter, our altitude pressure. Our battery test, our DC test for the DC voltage system. Our battery switch, generator, engine start switch, and APU start switch. All right, so unpause again. Let me reset my camera here, get to a better view. All right, so coming down here, we have our UHF VHF control panel. Then we have the auxiliary communication navigation and identification panel. And then coming down here, you have your internal light system. You have your instrument panel, console lights, warning caution lights, and floodlights. And this for the compass lights. Unlock the camera here. We're just about done for today. So stay with me, guys. Oh, lock her up. There we go. All right, and then coming to the far back here, we have the environmental control switch, your forward and aft equipment cooling switches. And then up here we have the defogging switch, followed by the cockpit pressure switch. Some more flood lamps that are all over the place. And then these guys aren't even modeled, so not going to worry about that. I think we have... Give me a second. I'm trying to get my camera right so I can get this. Here would be our night vision control switches, as well as the voice recorder stowage. And then finally, one little guy that's going to be hiding from you. I'm trying to get the view right. Is this guy right here, which is our seat ground safety lever. So the basically arms and disarms the ejection seat. Disarmed for out, lockdown for armed. Okay? And that's all we're going to worry about for today's course, folks. I hope you guys have enjoyed this, and I will see you guys in the next one where we talk about startup, taxi, and takeoff. I'll see you guys soon. Bye-bye.